Hi, it's Keith from the Evangelical Free Church Stony Stratford, and today we're continuing our series in Mark. And today we're looking at chapter 7, 31 to verse 37. At the end of the film, The Usual Suspects, you have that moment when you suddenly realise all the clues are there to point to who was the leader of the heist. And it's that great moment when you actually realise they're letting him go. It's good when you get something like that, something that's revealed slowly and suddenly it clicks. This is who the person is. And Mark's been doing that through the first 7 chapters of his gospel. He's been leaving us clues as to who Jesus is. As we come to this reading today, and before we move into another section of the gospel, he uses a miracle. And we think, oh, that's okay, we've seen miracles before. But he uses this particular miracle to very clearly to question us about what we're going to do about who Jesus is. Jesus is in northern Israel. And as is usual, some people bring someone to him to be healed. And we find it's someone who can hardly talk and he's deaf. And Jesus does a very, very strange action. Let me just read these verses. Verse 33, after he took him aside, away from the crowd, Jesus put his finger into the man's ears, then he spat and touched the man's tongue. He looked up to heaven and with a deep sigh said to him, Ephra, which means be opened. Now this is interesting because Jesus takes the man aside. It's not particularly public. And what he's clearly doing is clearly for the man's benefit. There's things here that really are quite useful. You know, he can see what Jesus is going to do. The word Ephra, be opened, it's really sort of saying, acknowledge what I'm going to do. Be open to my action. And interestingly enough, and not surprising enough, as we've seen in Mark so far, when he does this, verse 35, at this the man's ears were opened, his tongue was loosened, and he began to speak plainly. Now, not surprising, verse 36, Jesus asks for security, but as usual, everyone's talking. And then the people react in this way. Verse 37, people were overwhelmed with amazement. He has done everything well, they said. He even makes the deaf hear and the mute speak. And when we get to this point, we realize something a bit more is going on. The crowd has clearly picked up on something we haven't. And it's this. In Isaiah 35, verses 5 to 6, we read this. Then will the eyes of the blind be opened, and the ears of the deaf unstopped. They will leap, then the lame will leap like a deer, and the mute tongue will shout for joy. Now, the Jews in the crowd would have known that. This spoke about God's new age. And here they clearly see something happening. Here's a forerunner of it. A taste of it, and they associate it with Jesus. Maybe some mental gymnastics are starting to go on and people are starting to click. Because Mark is asking us, who is this that does everything well? Who is this that heals people? Who is this who forgives sins? Who is this who has control over nature? Who is this that has such great authority that he can actually control the created order and deal with our biggest problem, our sin, our rebellion against God? Mark's question to his readers is, well, what are you going to do about it? And that's the question that's being put to you and me today. It's not just a case of, is Jesus particularly good at doing parlor tricks or magic tricks? It's not a case of, is he a teacher of great wisdom? Yes, he is. But what does this all point to? Well, the people were starting to see this was God breaking into human history. And that's what Jesus came to do. And as we're coming close to Christmas, we're thinking about that. And so, my challenge to you and to me is, what are you going to make of it? Are you going to investigate Jesus further? Because a man who does the things like this deserves to be taken seriously. Well, if you're interested, and to help you with that, do feel free to pick up a gospel. There's some on the railings at the front of the church in the holders, or you can phone me, or do feel free to take any other books that are there. Again, thank you for listening.